From Bobby Munson losing his eye and his fingers, to Tig being forced to watch his daughter burn alive. These are Sons of Anarchy's biggest plot twists. While Sons of Anarchy has never shied away from punishing some of its core members, there were always a few sons whom I thought would just make it to the final episode, more or less unscathed. Bobby Elvis Munson was just one of them, but I couldn't have been more wrong. When ruthless August Marks snatched him, you'd have thought the club would make sure he was back in one piece. But then Mark sent them a little parcel containing one gouged out eye, Bobby's of course. And it didn't stop there, because there was a second parcel containing his fingers, until Bobby finally met his end. Despite his death, that first delivery was so shocking that it took the audience by surprise. No one would have thought they'd actually hurt Bobby, let alone send a shiny new iPad to watch the whole thing on video. Jeez. While people like Marks had no problem inflicting violence in the show, others like Tig weren't quite so on board, at least not in the beginning. He may have done his share of reprehensible stuff over the years, but at least he's super loyal to the club. So, in a surprising turn of events, it was his conscience that, ironically, caused the tragedy of Donna's death. Then President Clay ordered Tig to kill Opie, which he clearly struggled with. In this case, he could only bring himself to shoot at fellow son Opie's truck from a distance. But in opting for the shoot first and look later strategy, the bullet ends up hitting Donna. Because prior to anyone's knowledge, least of all Tig's obviously, Opie and Donna had swapped cars. The bullet that was intended for her husband had inadvertently ended up killing her instead. This was truly the plot twist no one saw coming. Now, the earlier episodes of Season 7 are also pretty painful to watch, mostly because there's a lot of senseless violence happening all too often, which totally could have been avoided if the characters had found out what the viewers knew ahead of time. But perhaps the most upsetting part was when it felt like a steady tidal wave of crimson began to flood the streets of Charming during the final few episodes. Due to some bungled deals with the Triads, the Chinese decided to hit their foes where it hurt them the most, and ended up targeting the Sun's most legit business venture, practically massacring all the Diosa escorts. The service was run and protected by Sam Crow, who never did anything to hurt anybody, but were definitely one of the gang's most valuable business assets. Embittered bikers or not, the Chinese knew they'd at least flinch at the sight of a dozen dead innocent women. While the Suns were too late to witness the awful scene, the viewers got a front row seat to the terrible slow-motion montage of the awful aftermath of the attack. Dozens of innocent women lay dead, strewn out across the Diosa brothel. Other than being completely horrifying in itself, it was also especially sad because Colette was among the victims. It's a shame that she didn't last longer on the show. And where there's violence, you'll also easily find corruption, rotting the core of even those institutes that are supposed to serve and protect. Like, if you throw a penny in Charming, it'll be picked up by at least 15 corrupt police officers. One of these corrupt baddies is ATF agent Josh Cohn, also known as Tara's very creepy ex. As his attempts to win her back become more and more violent, it's clear that he'll stop at nothing to achieve his messed up goals. There ultimately comes a point where he breaks into her house and tries to force himself on her. Thankfully, Tara shoots him in the gut, while Jax fires a bullet into his brain. If you thought it couldn't get worse than that, the two of them comfort each other by getting very intimate, while Josh's corpse is still there. Is that what true love is? While we're on the topic of Charming law enforcement, the town did get one half-decent guy, in the form of Deputy David Hale. Since he was sane and clean, Hale seemed to pose a real threat to the Suns and their criminal activities. Unlike a lot of other foes, he couldn't be bought off, and he wasn't a total psycho. Two very promising qualities for a charming police officer. He was even clever enough to figure out what the Suns were up to, and how he could stop them. Naturally, he had to be killed off, but interestingly, as one would think, his death didn't come at the hands of the Suns, or even in the line of duty. He was at a wig when the rival biker gang Calaveras ran him over. Yup, there is never a dull moment on the show, right? Similarly, everyone thought Clay and Gemma were gonna be forever. At the start, they really were the king and queen of the MC. Pretty well matched as far as anyone could tell, Clay was always portrayed as a good husband who'd do anything for Gemma. which is why it came as a massive surprise when Gemma confronted him about his plans to take out Tara. The two of them got into a really heated fight, with Clay reacting by viciously punching her in the face. It was a moment that had everyone gasping out loud and showing the audience that there is really nothing that this guy will not do. You could always tell that Clay's a scary guy, but this particular display of violence was nothing less than purely shocking. While things often tended to get violent in the show, nothing was as gut-wrenching as watching the clubhouse blow up to smithereens. No matter how ridiculous the Suns' activities got, the Teller Morrow garage was always considered to be somewhat of a safe space. The show spent so much time there for the first 6-ish seasons that it even became familiar to us, the audience. I mean, yeah, it could have been much worse, but thankfully, Jax managed to figure out what was happening and got everyone out, including his little son, to safety. But that doesn't make the explosion any less heartbreaking, and pinpointed that the rivalry between the Irish and the Suns had gotten really heated up by now. Had Jax not realized in time what was going on, everyone in the club would have been blown to bits and pieces. And that would have been a very dark end for the show. Clearly, the garage blowing up goes to show that Sons of Anarchy doesn't really believe in the art of subtlety. Everything all the time is overdramatic, big, and flashy, and strives to shock rather than engage. But there was one episode where it finally chose to hold back. At the beginning of the 6th season, Jax is preparing to get the club out of guns for the final time. But a bully kid gets a hold of one of those guns, which MC is distributing illegally, and decides to start shooting at school. For the first time, the camera doesn't follow the gut-wrenching act of violence, and the audience is left in the school playground, right outside the window, where the sounds of gunshots and screams are being heard. It's one of the most impactful and heartbreaking moments in the show, and one of the few times the series makes it clear that the club has a rather toxic effect on the world around it. This shocking plot twist also served as a stark reminder of the reality we live in, and was definitely difficult to process for most viewers. Speaking of difficult scenes, the show has made it clear time and again just how much the Reaper symbol means to the MC. The tattoos and the badges have an importance to the group, which is finally fully understood when Kyle comes back. Anyone who leaves or gets kicked out has to get the tattoo removed. So what starts as a friendly little barbecue quickly turns into a man having to choose between knife or fire, and ultimately getting his back burnt to a crisp with a blowtorch in order to remove a tattoo. Even the barbecues on the show aren't just barbecues, and I guess it's impossible to get out of the MC without some serious damage, whether it's emotional or physical. Most fans will know that Sons of Anarchy likes to start with a bang, and Season 5 was no different. It introduced a new antagonist with one of the most brutal scenes of the show. Damon Pope, a drug kingpin and a property magnate, wants revenge for his daughter being accidentally killed in a hit. So, in his quest for vengeance, he snatches Tig's daughter, Dawn, and proceeds to do the unthinkable. This is an especially horrible scene to watch, but I guess the show chose to do it that way for it to be as impactful as possible. Damon proceeds to kidnap the daughter in a bid to get his revenge on the MC, and burns her alive in front of her father, Tig. By Season 5, we're well aware that Tig is capable of some pretty serious violence himself, but this was extraordinarily nasty by all standards, even for him. Still sends shudders down my spine just thinking about it. From Tig watching his daughter burn alive, to Bobby Munson losing his eye and his fingers, those were Sons of Anarchy's biggest plot twists.